Grab a seat. So hello to all of you lovely people. Thank you very, very much for coming down this night, especially in the weather that we have outside right now. I'm sure it wasn't easy, especially for the folks that work in the office who probably haven't left the office yet. So if you do work at Achievers, I'm sure people coming from the outside will be more than happy to tell you what kind of treat you're in for when you step outside. Just a quick, we'll get right down into business. I actually don't know where the clicker is. Is this it? Okay, perfect. So a quick housekeeping item. I'm very, very happy to announce that we are now at 1199 members, and that's all thanks to you guys. So if you can give a quick round of applause. We are growing and continuing to grow, so if you could please let your friends know so we can share the love and everyone can enjoy these tech talks. Quick reminder that the slides and videos are available online on meetup.com/achieverstech and achievers.com/tech. So before the talk, I'd like to give a very, very quick intro on the word fail. So Urban Dictionary actually defines it as the glorious lack of success. It's an amazing word that can sum up almost any bad situation in a single syllable. Example. Sam, my girlfriend just broke up with me. Sophie, fail. Example, a baseball player swings at a ball and the ball instead hits him in the groin. Fail. Example, fail. 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 But tonight, you guys are all here to learn more about a fail that is way more important and impacts millions and millions of people. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our very own Bobby Bradford. Give it up for him, everybody, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to take 1 minute or 1 second. Let's see how quick I can do this. Oh, you don't want to see that one. You want to see this one. That wasn't a fail. This is a fail. Why is that there? That shouldn't be there. I don't care that much about it. Thanks, Hytham. So hi guys, thank you for being here. As Hytham said, I really appreciate you guys coming out. I was expecting actually like half the amount of people that were here. Actually, I was hoping for double the amount of people that are here, but I was expecting half of the people to show up. Like Hytham said, my name is Bobby Bradford. I'm senior product designer here at Achievers, and I've been here for about 4 years. I can't stand public speaking. It's one of my pet peeves. I really hate doing it. But the reason why I'm up here is because I'm actually really passionate about UX, about design, and solving users' problems. And that's the only reason why you guys got me up here to actually talk about this. So bear with me as I run through my presentation. I redid my presentation last night so that I could do it in a little bit more free-form format, which I'm a lot more comfortable with. So we'll get to some of that later, and hopefully it works out. This is a nice fail, right? Like, why would you put that over there? The water's down here. So I'm not going to talk specifically about fail and UX fail and show a whole bunch of pictures like Hytham did for the entire presentation. What I'm going to really talk about is UX culture, and building a UX culture that prevents you from UX failing. But I am going to show a couple of them in the beginning just because I have to get this out of the way. So let's have a look at a couple of slides around how, if you wanted to UX fail, how you could go about doing that. So if you want to UX fail, you can start off by being confusing. I don't know why a yes or no question has to be that complicated. If you want to UX fail, you can be hard to use. So one of the things that I did just the other day was I was trying to unclutter my inbox. I decided to unsubscribe from an email, so I clicked unsubscribe. It brought me to the website. The website forced me to log into the site to be able to unsubscribe to the email, but I couldn't remember my password, so then I had to go and do the password reset, which then sent me an email to the service that I'm trying to unsubscribe to. And then I end up going back into it, and then when you get presented with something like this afterwards to reset your password, that's a great way to fail. It's super hard to use. Another way to fail is to be a jerk. Imagine if you were presented with this after you pressed the forgot my username button. You never want to treat your users like this. You never want to do this in real life. Imagine, so you go into a restaurant, right, and you order something, and the waiter or the waitress comes back to you 5 minutes later and says, I'm really sorry, but I forgot what your order was. And you say, oh yeah, my order? Yeah, it was the same thing I ordered the first time. It's a perfect way to get somebody to spit in your food. You can't spit in the product, but you can spit in the food. If you want to UX fail, ignore the details. For some reason, clicking this button also disables all margin and padding on the thing. That's for the designers out there. But I'm not actually going to sit here and go through UX fails for the whole night. I actually think that a lot of those, and the reason why you guys are laughing is because you know what's wrong with them. You already can look at them and understand why they're failures. And we should be able to stop that from happening. And I think that's because it's human nature, and because I'm guessing you guys, because you're here, you're all humans, so you all have it in you to be able to stop those failures. I'm full of cheesy jokes. I know you're laughing, but I'm full of them, don't worry. What you really want to find out is how to stop those things from happening in the first place, and how to build a product that doesn't fail and creates long-term business value by creating engaged users. Design is a differentiator. Design has always been a differentiator within companies. But the thing is, companies are getting so good at doing design that it's becoming the norm for people. So people are now starting to put together products that engage and that enhance people's lives, that fit seamlessly into them. And it's harder and harder to create products that delight, or that are easier, people expect by their very nature that all products should delight them, they should be easy to use, or even become invisible when they need to be. And so essentially there's a new standard that's out there. How many of you know Mint.com? Wow, so a lot of people, awesome. So Mint.com came onto the market. Essentially what they had was a product that did some magic in the background and could aggregate a whole bunch of your banking information by allowing you to log into those systems. And they had a smart algorithm, pulled all that stuff together. But they did a really smart thing, and they paired with a designer that really pushed to make sure that the interface was easy to use and intuitive. And they ended up with a product that nobody else in the market was doing. None of the other banking institutions were doing something like this. And now you're starting to see the evolution of this. Simple bank in the States has now basically created an entire business model around trying to do this, but right from the ground up. So instead of your TD and like exporting into this, you can now go to Simple and just end up with this kind of thing in the first place. Square's a really cool one. We went to San Francisco, to our office in San Francisco. I hadn't actually used Square. We get out of the airport, get in a taxi, go to the hotel, and the guy in the car hands me his iPhone with the little Square thing, and I swipe the card, and I type in my email, and I sign the little thing on the phone, which is pretty cool. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a great experience. And I hit send, and the thing, immediately I've got a receipt in my pocket. I'm like, wow, Square's pretty neat. And this guy's able to do this whole thing. It's a great experience for me. Then we go and we're leaving San Francisco, and we're coming back to Toronto, and another cab out to the airport, another Square fare, and swipe, get the whole thing. But this time the whole thing, the Square's got all my preferences saved, everything's tied in with my credit card number, and for me as the end user, I barely had to do anything. All I had to do was sign, and it knew exactly what I wanted it to do. So Square had, from the very beginning, had figured out exactly how to optimize that flow for me, and the experience for me as an end user was really seamless. Nest is an interesting one. They started with user experience right from the very beginning, and they kind of went out and said, how can we use user experience to define a market? So they've attacked smoke alarms, and they've attacked thermostats, And basically, they're not really coming up with new products, but they're coming up with new ways of interfacing with those products. And they've come up with new ways of new and better experiences around those products. This is a really good example. I have a 1-year-old daughter, and she goes to bed usually around like 6:30 or whatever, and then we start cooking afterwards, and there is a fire alarm that is just down the hall. We've got like a stove from like the 1970s with like a little flip clock on the front. And it's guaranteed that every single night, every time we open the thing, there's going to be some kind of smoke that's going to come out of it, and the smoke alarm's going to go off, and my kid's going to wake up. And for me, it's really easy. I can just walk over and like pull the thing down from the ceiling, but my wife's like this tall, so she can't do that. So she's doing this exact thing like every single night. And then she's on Pinterest and on Facebook and stuff, and she's saying, when are we going to get like one of those Nest things? Because we need that, because it needs to solve the problem that we're having right now. So what sets these companies apart is that they have a UX culture. These guys are lucky. A lot of them started at the very beginning by defining that they were going to have UX as a differentiator, that they were going to use UX as to drive how their company and how their business is going to work. But not everybody can start that way. This is an example of the UX maturity model. There's tons of these out there. This is one that I pulled off of Johnny Holland's site. And essentially what it is a set of levels that a company goes through as they learn more and as UX becomes more assimilated and more adopted within their organization. So at the very bottom, UX is unrecognized. Second one, people are interested in it, invested, committed, engaged. And then at the very top one, embedded. So the companies that we just saw are probably playing in that 5 or 6 range, where all of their decisions are based on how the user is going to be experiencing their product, or they're going to make strategic decisions around what they're going to do based on the experiences. Before I continue, I want to find out who you guys are. I've got 3 really simple questions, and it'll help me kind of shape some of the stuff a little bit later on. How many of you here have teams of designers working within your organization? Cool. So I'd say about half of you. How many of you have a single designer that's catering to a bunch of different people within your organization? All right, another spread. You guys are like sitting this way, and the other guys are sitting this way. That's kind of cool. And then how many of you are the actual designers within the organization? All right, cool. So there's some stuff in here for you guys too. Bonus for you guys. So everybody likes power-ups. Just by being here, you guys have leveled up from level 1 to level 2. Just because you are no longer hostile towards usability. Obviously, you braved the snow and everything to get here to be able to talk about UX and usability. But my guess is that you guys are probably all playing somewhere between 2, 3, and 4. If you're already in 5 and 6, you're probably not here because you should be either giving a talk at your organizations or either let's talk afterwards because I want to pick your brain about a few things. I think Achievers right now is probably playing somewhere in between, right around this line, in between 3 and 4. We have a lot of practices that we're doing and things that we're doing on a continual basis, but we're just now starting to get that adoption and that drive from our senior leadership and building it directly into our strategy. But I don't want to talk about culture the whole time. Culture is really, really hard. It's hard for me to give you guys a takeaway and say, hey, like, go back to your companies and create culture. Like, that's pretty challenging. It takes a long time to have a culture that matures. I've been here for 4 years, and we're just now getting to that stage. And it proves that you can get a long way without a UX culture. If your product is valuable and people want it, I think it can look terrible, and they'll still use it. Craigslist is a great example of that. The product does a really good job. It's super ugly, but it's really easy to use, and people get what they want out of it. Whoa, cool. Earthquake? So yeah, culture takes a long time to do, and it's really hard to do. So I was thinking, how can I create value for you guys? How can I give you something that you can take away and actually use within your organizations, or how can I teach you some of the lessons that we've learned here at Achievers, and how can we turn UX fails, flip them around, and turn them into UX wins? And what I was thinking is what we could do is talk about UX culture builders. So there are things that you can do within your organization to start building and start fostering that culture. And because culture is organic, so I got to go around and start planting some seeds, and as people start adopting it, they'll see the value of it, and that culture will start to grow. So just for fun, again, because I needed to kind of get out of my head and get out of the script and do all that kind of stuff because I hate public speaking, I wanted to be able to speak passionately about the things that we've learned. So I came up with 7 things that I think that have been most impactful here at Achievers. Some of them are newer than others. Some of them are almost brand new, but we're already starting to see the impacts of these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys to pick which order we're going to do this. So it's going to be a little bit interactive, and I'm going to end up doing it off the top of my head. Well, I have slides, so it's not totally off the top of my head. So where do you guys want to start? If nobody puts up their hands as volunteers, and I don't want any achievers to do this. I want this to be somebody else, no plants. Where do you want to start? Prototyping. Prototyping? All right, cool. Love prototyping. Bam. Prototyping. Did we talk? No, we didn't talk before. Okay. Prototyping, slay the dragon. So imagine you could go on a quest, and you could slay the dragon at the very beginning. Right? The rest of the quest would just be this like leisurely stroll to go pick up the princess or collect the gold or whatever, right? By doing prototyping, what you can do is de-risk your project right from the very start. So figure out what it is about the project that you're working on, or the feature that you're working on, and what is it that is keeping you up at night about that project? What is it that's going to make that project fail? Is there a query that's not going to run fast enough that you need to test? Is there a flow that's not going to work that you need to make sure that if our users don't get this, then we're completely screwed? Figure out how to test that right at the very front, because if you wait until the end, you're not going to have enough time to be able to test it. So prototyping is a great way to de-risk. It's also a great way to go and explore. So this is from the Flip Mino. They put a whole bunch of different prototypes together to see how they feel in the person's hand, how it balances, and how people would actually use it. And it's a great way to explore creatively and come up with new ideas of how your product should be set up. Prototyping is also a fantastic communications tool. So this is how we used to do our communications. We came up with this cool little like diagram thing where you could put mock-ups up there, and there was flow diagrams. You click on this thing, you go this other stuff. We could come up with all sorts of crazy, terrible to use, confusing things. And it got to the point where developers were asking us, hey, can you guys get like a plotter in the UX area and just print those things out really big so that I can put them on there, and then we can follow the lines through, like this kind of like snakes and ladders thing, to see how the whole thing interaction worked. And at that point I realized that we're doing this the wrong way, and that we need to talk in flows and not talk in screens and not talk in lines. So we switched over to using Envision. So this is one of the tools that you can use for prototyping. It's a great way to communicate with developers and with other stakeholders if you can show them how to actually click through things and show things in context. When you click this button, this is where it goes. When you click this thing, it goes here. That kind of thing. Envision is not the only one that you can use. It's the one that we happen to use here a lot. It's a great tool for collaboration sharing. You can toss notes in there. PopApp is another cool one for your phone. It allows you to take sketches and you can click and do things. But there's tons and tons of tools out there. I implore you to go, if you're not using tools like this already, find one that works really well for you guys and for your workflow. These ones might not work for how you guys do things. There's Axure and a whole bunch of other higher level ones as well. Or you can go super low level and do paper prototypes. Just draw something on a piece of paper, cut it out, show it to somebody, and have them give you some feedback. I've even done ones where I've drawn on the whiteboard what the interface would look like, used my phone to take a little video of what the interaction would be like when I clicked on it, and then said to the developer, like, hey, this is the animation that I want. So prototypes are a fantastic way of communicating. Prototypes, I think, should be throwaway. Unless you're doing something like de-risking and making sure that that query runs really quick, or making sure that that interface is going to work on your phone or something like that. Create a prototype that is designed to get rid of whatever that risk was, and throw it away. And don't be afraid to throw it away when it's done. Its job is to be able to communicate, to discover, and to de-risk. not to end up in your product. If you're thinking about doing stuff in a lean methodology and you want to do stuff in an iterative cycle, then that's a completely different thing. I didn't include that in the slides. So that's prototyping. What do you guys want to do next? Or do you have a question? Go ahead. Yeah.
So it might not be a silver bullet answer for this, but I find that it's often very easy to go over the top. Like, so when is it prototyping enough prototyping? Like, when do you, or is there, what are your thoughts on that?
At the very beginning, figure out what you're trying to de-risk and why you're doing a prototype. If you're trying to figure out, if you're trying to make sure that people can get through something, just do that part and concentrate on that part. You should be able to figure out when somebody is successful or not doing a user test, so build a prototype specifically for that. Any other questions on prototyping? No? Cool.
What if you want to know if something is technologically?
That's a perfect one. So we here at Achievers work in an agile method, and so we have sprints when we do our work. So essentially we have a big project, it gets broken up into chunks, and then those chunks we have cycles that we go through. I suggest if you're trying to figure out if something's technically feasible, again, do that right up at the very front. If you can't get that thing to work, then you either got to come up with a new solution, or you got to you got to figure out how to make it work.
So one of the problems we have are companies that address design as kind of force a design on the developers.
Yep.
Whereas it's just not possible with technology. And there's no feedback loop. So it seems like people are directing the developers what to do.
Yep.
Might be shifting more of it.
Well, maybe we should talk about user testing. You want to talk about user testing? Cool. That was not a plan. It's just a natural segue. User testing, do it sooner than you think. And this fits really well with prototyping. So here at Achievers, we used to only test about 1 out of every 10 of the features that we put into production. I'm talking about user testing, not QA, but user testing. So that meant that we would sit down and do our best guess and kind of rely upon our expertise to be able to do something, but we wouldn't really know what things were going to happen once we actually got it out in the product. We're trying to fix that, and well, we are fixing that, I should say. We started to test pretty much every single feature that we're doing. We're trying to put in more rigor around saying that any feature that ends up in the platform, it has to have gone through user testing. We have to have shown that we've done it. There's a few things that I've learned along the way that I think are really important when doing user testing. And this is even from some of the ad hoc stuff and now in our more formalized process. One, write a script and stick to it. So when you're doing testing, you should put together a script, introduce the product, show it to somebody, and run that test. Get your next person, do the same thing, run the test. Next person, run the test. I've done this before where I've done the first test and then I say like, hey, we're going to test this flow, you're going to click through this thing, this is how it's going to work, and I watch and I get the feedback, and then I go to the next person, I show it to them, and I'm like, so you're going to click through this flow, you might run into some problems here, and then you're going to go to the next thing, and then they breeze through the whole thing because I pointed out exactly where the problems were, and I'm like, yeah, I nailed the design on this thing. So stick to it, write out a script, stick to it. It'll help you identify, because if you do it consistently, it'll help you identify the things that are super obvious that you need to fix. And ideally, when you're going and doing a user test, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of stuff. You just want to nail those top 5 things, get them fixed, and then do some more testing afterwards. Prototype. So obviously, when you're doing user testing, you're going to need a prototype. You don't always have to have a fancy prototype. This is an example of a prototyping session that we did here at Achievers. We had a feature that had several different UIs that we needed to test. We didn't have time to build the whole thing out. So what we did was created a paper prototype. Just designed some stuff, printed it out, put them on pieces of paper, and then I acted as the computer and swapped things out. And then the user was able to click and write on pieces of paper and fill out the fields. Prototyping doesn't have to be an expensive thing, and it doesn't have to be a big, long step in your process. I don't know if it's looped yet, but you get the idea. Include the dev team. So whenever you're doing testing, bring your dev team in your testing. So if development is running off and doing testing on queries and that kind of thing that are going to affect your user experience, we had this conversation yesterday actually here about a feature. We wanted to know how long it was going to take after somebody clicked a button and the developer came into the room. We had a discussion around how long it would take and how we could optimize the query. The two of us were working together and we came up with a solution that entirely changed how that whole flow was going to work, and we eliminated it from the workflow. But include the dev team in all of your tests. Have them spectate on the test. Have them be part of the test. It can be really hard to tell a developer that's been working on something for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long, hey, we're gonna go and change this thing now. They've been slaving over this thing on weekends and in their mom's basement or whatever, programming. And then they come back to you with this thing. Sorry, that's a Matt York joke. They come back to you with this thing, and then you're like, yeah, we figured out this stuff in testing, and we need to now change it. But if they're part of that process, if they're part of the user testing, they're going to see the same things that you're seeing. Or you can point out to them, hey, they just screwed up this thing here. And then you guys are working together as a team. They're bought into the strategy, and it can help you kind of guide that process and help you be able to iterate. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't know if I have any more slides on here. We can follow up in a second. Another thing on user testing is record your sessions. You're going to forget what happened in those sessions. If you can put together video to be able to go back, probably a month later, you're not going to need them. You're just going to want to throw them out. It's nice to have later on to be able to put in presentations and stuff. But, and not just these kinds of presentations, but if you're doing higher level presentations, if you're presenting to executives or leadership members, and you want to tell them, hey, this is why we changed this. This is why we need we need to push the launch to be later. Because we found in testing this, and this. Like, look how people paused and didn't understand this. We need to go back, buy time to go and do another design cycle, buy time to go and do another iteration cycle. It makes it really clear for people. Log your tests. So we had the problem of being really sporadic about doing our tests. So now we have a log. And this is just a page in our wiki. We write who the test was, whether it was a casual test or whether it was a formal test, what it was for, and what some of the outcomes were. And then it can help you make sure that you're being consistent. And make sure that you're doing user tests on things that you can actually iterate on. So if you're doing it early on in the process, it's really good. But if you are going and testing things that you can't actually change, and I've done this a lot because I'm really passionate about, I'm like, that thing's broken. Let's go and test and see if we can do this new design for it. And I take it over. I'm like, look how crappy this thing is. We can make it better. And they're like, we don't have that on our roadmap, and we're probably not going to do it for another year. And I'm like, oh, crushed, and I need to go have a drink or something. So make sure that you're testing things that you can actually iterate on. Did that answer your question?
Sure. Well, that implies that you only came up with design and then all this testing, but you're part of it. Shouldn't you involve the developer when you're actually designing?
Yes, you definitely should. So if you are starting a sprint, or you're starting, again, because we're working in Agile, if you're starting a development process and you're kicking off a feature, everybody should get in a room and work together as a collaborative team. And that's another thing about building a culture of UX, that everybody on the whole team, you should have stakeholders that include development, include product. If you have marketing people that are in there that can give you insight into what the customer might want or how they're going to market things, and so that they can get a sense of where they're going with it, have all those people in the room. They don't have to be there for every single step of the process, but having them there at the beginning allows them to give some feedback right from the start. An example of that is when I said that we were trying to figure out how to design this feature, and we wanted to know how long it was going to take for something to click. The developer was literally sitting next to us as we were doing the designs and whiteboarding. And often developers can have the best ideas of how to do something, because you're like, oh, we have to do it this way or have to do this other thing, and they're like, I don't know, we can just bypass this with this fancy piece of code or something. What do you guys want to do next? Metrics? All right. Metrics, stop guessing. Metrics are really important. So, and by metrics I mean like things like Google Analytics or KISS metrics or Crazy Egg or Mixpanel. How many of you guys are tracking how users' behaviors within your platform right now? Really? That's it? Wow, so it's funny, I was expecting everybody to have their hand up. Like literally, like you'll see in a second, like this to me is like a Captain Obvious thing. If you're not tracking metrics right now, you have no idea what your users are doing. Like how do you figure out what you're going to do for the next, how are you going to make your next decision? I'll tell you that here, we haven't been very diligent about tracking user behaviors, so actually tracking and watching how people click and actually interact with our platform. And it's been a little bit of a struggle to get that to happen, but it's now happening, and we're actually doing it, and it's become part of our process and become part of our cycle. That doesn't mean to say that we didn't look at metrics pretty much every single day to see if people are using our platform. We had Google Analytics constantly running on our platform, and that we would look through our database to see how people were interacting and which features people were using, which features people were not using. We definitely did that. We would look at our server logs to see what pages people were interacting with. But we didn't have event-based metrics. So if you guys are not tracking metrics right now, make sure you build that into part of your process. It'll help you figure out what you need to do next and give you a lot of insight. I like tracking things that you don't even have a use for yet. This is 4 gigabytes of data. These are punch cards being stored. So imagine, like, I mean, I've got, wherever my phone is, like that's 4 gigs. So you might as well just track whatever you can track. Throw a system in there that's going in and keeping record of something. What's going to happen is a year later, you're going to be like, I want to compare how we're doing this now to how we were doing it a year before, or last year. And if you're not tracking the stuff, then it's not there, and it's not gonna work for you. Metrics are a great way to win an argument. You can be in a room with a high-powered executive, and they can say, I think this thing should be working this way, and it should do this other thing. And you'd be like, the metrics say elsewise. And it like sits them down, puts them in their place, makes you look like you're really smart and you know what you're talking about. Follow up with your metrics. So once you guys have gone back out and installed one of those metrics tracking systems, whatever flavor works for you guys, make sure you follow up on them. So often we take stuff and we build something and we ship it and we throw it over the fence and we're like, are people buying it? And it's like, yeah, they're buying it. Great, we're building a fantastic product. People are buying our stuff. But we designed the whole thing. We spent all this time figuring out user flows and everything, but we often don't go back to make sure that people are using things the way that we actually expected them to use it. So they might be skipping steps or doing stuff that we didn't expect. But if you follow up with, make sure you go back and follow up with your metrics so that you can make smarter decisions and continue to iterate and continue to improve on your product. I was like, am I out of time? I didn't realize I was out of time already.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Metrics. So since ultimately, in most cases, it's the developers that are going to be putting the metrics tracking into the code.
Yep.
How do you ensure that you are constantly adding metrics tracking for every new thing that you're building? How do you ingrain that into the culture?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do within our UX team is that we do that as part of our process. So when you're designing something, you will have built a prototype or you have gone through user testing, and there'll still be some things that you have some questions around and you're like, I'm not 100% sure that that's the right solution for this thing. That's a perfect flag for you to know that you should put a metric to be able to track that stuff. So all of our designers, when they're putting stuff together, they also put together a list of all of the things that we want to track. There might be multiple avenues to get into a feature, or if you want to do A/B testing or something like that later, you can define that when you're going through your design phase. Any other questions?
What tool is it that you guys use internally to track user metrics other than Google Analytics?
So right now we have Splunk, which runs on our database and our backend systems, which gives us some really in-depth information around how our system's actually performing. Obviously, we have our database itself and all the data there. We primarily rely upon Google Analytics to do a lot of that stuff. We've tried Mixpanel for a little bit on some things, but mostly we use Google Analytics and the event tracking in Google Analytics to watch how people use that both on desktop and on mobile.
What metrics do you usually look at for UX?
So you could use, so we've talked about using Crazy Egg. Crazy Egg is one of those things that'll give you heat maps. So if you guys are more doing marketing and that kind of thing, that's a great way to be able to see where people are using a platform, how far down they're scrolling on pages and that kind of thing. So you said, what method are we using to be able to track that stuff?
I use the Google Analytics and MeetUp, that's about it, but for UX, I use one.
So one of the things that Google Analytics has, and this is the project that we just went through here, was there's an event tracking tag that you can add to any interaction on your platform or any interaction on the page. So anytime there's a button or a link or a hover or anything that you can tie JavaScript event to, you can put an action on there. And it ends up having like the event that's happening, there is a label, there's a category, and then you can attach other data to it as well. So you could attach a user to it or something. So you can figure out, like if you've got 2 calls to action on the page and you want to know how people are getting to your sign-up page, you could put an event tracking code on that, and then later on go back into your metrics and be able to see, yeah, people are clicking on this one and not clicking on this other one. So it's less kind of granular than the heat map, or more granular than the heat map. But that's how we do it here right now. Cool. Yeah, go into the side panel, go down, look for behavior, under behaviors, and there's a thing that says events. And then you can put them in. One of the things that we had to do with that was we had a spreadsheet. This is the annoying part. We have a spreadsheet where we list and categorize all the different things that we're tracking. So it's a UX team's job to figure out what we're going to do with the product manager and then put that into the spreadsheet so that we are all using the same language, same categories, and that kind of thing, so the metrics are useful. It's as the platform changes and as new features come in, you have to keep it updated. Any other questions on metrics? No? What next? Design principles? All right. Wait, you already had one. Where was the, no, I'm kidding. You get the next one. Design principles. So this one to me is probably the biggest one for creating a culture. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with developers around whether we should use camel case or underscore, or whether if statements should be on one line or if they should be broken on multiple lines, if on an else statement, if the brackets should be there or not. Like years of these meetings. I'll never get that time of my life back. The crappy thing is, though, that designers do this too. So we have conversations around whether something is balanced or whether it's too blue. That's my favorite one. We do those kind of conversations all the time too. But what that's all about is creating a language and creating a set of rules around how you guys communicate and what's actually important. If you think back at some of the fails that we saw at the very beginning, and we were saying that we can all kind of identify why those things might be wrong, it can sometimes be hard to vocalize why they're wrong. So what our team did was, and this is the UX team, we sat down in a room and figured out what kind of product we wanted to build and what we wanted to look like and how we wanted to feel. And we came up with some visual design principles that we use here. One is that our stuff needs to be consistent, that it needs to be clean, it needs to be vibrant, and it needs to be obvious. So these are our visual design principles. And then inside of each one of these, so for example, for Be Clean, we have ways of evaluating whether that thing is actually clean. So is it embracing minimalism? Are we cluttering or cuddling? So are we doing the things where we don't have padding or margin on stuff, or is stuff too compact? Are we adding distractions? Are there a ton of drop shadows and borders and flashy things on stuff that don't actually need to be there because it's the latest trend or whatever? And ensure that the design feels light. So when somebody's using it, it should be light. So for each one of our design principles, we have a whole bunch of criteria that we use to shape our conversations. And in all of our critiques and when we're talking about how we should design a feature, we use these as our mode of communication. And it has really, really helped us be able to say, hey, not that I don't like your design, I just don't think it's clean. And then it's like, okay, yeah, we already agreed that clean is important, so I should probably go and change that. For developers in the room, interesting thing is that these apply to you guys too. So if you think about it, your code needs to be consistent. The code needs to be clean. Vibrant might be that it needs to be quick, it needs to be able to respond fast and be optimized. And things need to be obvious, it needs to have semantic meaning, and I want to be able to just read through the code, and it has to be good, clean code. So this stuff applies to you guys too. Our principles don't just apply to visual design principles, so we have a bunch of different ones. We have visual design, user experience principles, and we also have product principles. And our product principles are things like joy to use, be where they are, that kind of thing. So making sure that we're designing products that we're all aligned in designing products that do exactly what we want, or features that we want them to do. And then our user experience principles are things like don't get in the user's way, or use smart copy, or micro interactions matter. There's a great resource online for this stuff, designprinciplesftw.com. There's a guy, Gabriel Svendenberg, who is compiling a whole bunch of design and product principles on there, which I find to be super useful. My recommendation for you guys is if you want to create principles within your company and you have a UX team, or even if you don't have a UX team, you have a bunch of developers, get everybody in a room and say, what do we want our product to be? We want to stop pushing out this crap and failing at this stuff. What is it that we want to put together? And just write it all on a whiteboard, aggregate them all together. That's the hard part, but aggregate them all together, and you'll come up with a set of laws that you can kind of say, we can't ship this thing, or it needs to be better because it doesn't live up to our design principles. Cool? Any questions on that?
Principles are really solid, right? I know we do a lot of agile development, so what happens if that really shakes up everything?
So they are a foundation for a conversation. They're a framework for a conversation. But I think they should actually shift and change. So for instance, our product principles, we have an overarching set, but we'll pick ones that apply to a specific feature, or we'll pick ones that apply to a specific project. So if you have a situation where it shakes up the whole thing and we need to do this other thing, define a new set of principles and say that these are the principles for this project, and we agree that these are going to be different than our other ones, but for this project, these are what they are, so that you can continue to relate back all your conversations back to those principles. So what do you guys want to, any more questions on that one? No? What do you guys want to do next? Somebody back there had. All right, pattern library. Yeah, sorry, it's Keynote, so I can't change the slides for each one. I would have to do this crazy, I don't know how many, I'm a designer, not a mathematician, so I can't tell you how many combinations there would be for that. Pattern library. Don't work too hard. So at one point, this is from a couple of years ago, this is a reporting interface that we used to have. This was a presentation that I gave to our development and QA organization, QA teams, and I was really frustrated at this point. I was highlighting that manage button is a different button than all the other buttons, and this thing overlaps and is different than that other thing up there, and there's another one here, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on here. How can you guys not see this? Why is this why are you guys not seeing this? And I was just completely freaking out. Essentially, my job at that time was to take the requirements that the product manager gave me, figure out how that would look, then give it to the developers so that they could ignore the requirements that the product manager has put together and just work off my mock-ups. And then subsequently they could ignore my mock-ups and just kind of do something. All right, it was a great system. I was like, this is dumb. We shouldn't be working this way. The other thing I was doing was I was trying to still figure out what the interface was going to look like. So every single mock-up that I was doing was a mock-up. And by that I mean I'm pixel pushing and I'm making stuff look sparkly as much as I can, but I'm iterating every single time with the assumption that the developers are putting together scalable code, and when I change the design of a button, it's going to change it on all of the buttons. But everybody's working on different code branches and different places and everything, and that was really not what was happening. So what we ended up with was Frankenstein design all over the place. So I'm like, okay, well, I want to stop making mock-ups because they're too expensive to do and they take too long. What I want to do is wireframes, and then I just want to refer people back to what the thing should actually be. So I was like, I'm going to make a pattern library. And essentially, a pattern library is a place where I could say, here's a design, here's a wireframe of how this thing should, the interaction should work. And then you guys can go and look at PTN 72, and that's what buttons are. And then I could just refer them back to it. Then QA would know exactly what that thing was supposed to look like when it was done. And the new developer that started would be like, hey, this is what this thing is supposed to look like. An example, you could go in and click on how to use a pattern, and you'd end up with something like this. It would have all the specifications or whatever, and I would put in flat stuff, like little flat mock-ups or whatever, and spec them out. This whole project was a massive failure. Huge failure. Spent a ton of time over Christmas coding this thing. I was really proud of it. But nobody used it. The developers never adopted it. It never really caught on at all. And the reason why it didn't catch on was because I didn't really use proper product design principles when I did it. I didn't kind of build this thing to be where my user was. This was a thing that sat on the UX server. It didn't sit in the developer's code. So they didn't have a place to go and copy and paste. They had to leave and go to their browser and do some other thing. QA didn't even know that this existed. And then I was the only guy that was actually keeping this stuff maintained. And I already have a day job doing design and all this other stuff. I can't be building systems for people to kind of manage the process. So that thing was a failure. Good thing is, though, we learned all those lessons. So now our developers own our pattern library. So whenever we go and do designs, our developers will sit down and identify and ask us, hey, are we going to be using this thing on multiple features across the platform? And it's like, yeah, we're going to totally use it. We're building a system so we can put this here, here, and here. And UX designers love to build systems for stuff, so I get excited about that. And they're like, okay, cool, we'll build a pattern for it. And it sits in our product, it sits in our code base, so a new developer can come in. It's got code, it's got documentation. I should have stuck a screenshot in here, but it's got code and it's got documentation in there. It looks way better than the one that I put together, which is surprising, given that developers designed and built it themselves. Singer. But it's being adopted and it's actually being used and it's growing organically and it's way better than anything that we had put together before. But you don't have to do this from scratch. There's tools out there that can help you do this if you want. Patternry is one that I looked up at the very beginning, but I didn't want to spend any money and I had some free time over Christmas, so I was like, oh, I'll just build it myself. But it's a really good reference and a place that you can do that. Another thing is that you can do is start with a framework from the very beginning. So you could use something like Bootstrap, or you could use something like Foundation to put the whole thing together. So you don't even need a pattern library. You just use an existing framework that has documentation, has design, and all that kind of thing. The other thing with this is that designers like to change stuff all the time. They like to iterate and like to change how things look all the time. This kind of helps confine us in a box and keep us on track. Cool. What do we have left? We did design principles, we did user testing, we did prototyping, we did metrics. We got personas and critique. Which one do you guys want to do? Personas. They're louder. Yeah. How many of you actually know what personas are? Cool. So most of the people with designers in their companies, it's still that same kind of channel there. I don't even remember if that was a correlation or not. But to me, personas are basically a silhouette or a caricature of who your users are. And like the thing said at the beginning, I used to believe that we didn't need them. So Basecamp is designed or is built by a company called 37 Signals. They're actually renaming their company and amalgamating stuff and becoming just Basecamp. That's cool news if anybody's into that kind of stuff. They're the ones that put together Ruby on Rails, which a lot of you probably know. They preach that you don't need personas. they're essentially, or that they don't need personas, they're building products for people that are like them, so they understand who the users are. So we don't need to have personas to kind of reflect who a user is. And I thought this too. I was like, I came in here, we had some personas in the platform, in our wiki, which I never looked at, because we only had 3 different user groups. And again, personas represent your users, represent who your users are. So we had a member user, which was basically the bulk of the people on our platform. We had an administrator, and we had executives. And that's really easy to remember 3, so why do I need to worry about them? So I didn't pay attention to them whatsoever. But as our company grew and our client base grew, we went from having programs within our platform with, say, 2,000 users. So a company working with companies that have 2,000 people, all the way up to now we're working with companies that have 300,000 people in their company, right? And when that happens, there's a whole bunch of middle management that shows up. You have your end users and you have your administrators that are configuring stuff, but when you have 300,000 people, you can't have one administrator that is going to distribute points and run reports and do all that kind of stuff for 300,000 people. So we ended up with this new user persona, which was the manager persona. And at that point, it opened my eyes up to you know what, I should probably have these listed on the board so that when we're starting to think about what our features need to be, that we have something to refer back to. And it changed my perspective entirely on whether personas were useful or not. Having personas is a great way to be able to tell when your user base changes. So if you have a new group of people that are starting to use your platform and you've already defined what your existing group is, when you find that new group show up, you're like, oh, there's some new business opportunities there. There's new features that we can build for these people and new ways of thinking about how we should approach our product. Personas help you write better stories. I hope all of you know how to write a user story if you're in a software company. If not, you should figure that out, do some Googling. Essentially, user story is, as a certain role, I want to do something so that whatever. For us, in this case, when the manager persona showed up, it would have been something like saying, as a manager, I want to recognize my direct reports so that they feel appreciated. If you replace manager with user and just say, as a user, I'd like to recognize my direct reports so that they feel appreciated, it abstracts it and you don't really understand what the kinds of things that person needs to be able to do. But if you say that they're a manager, you know what permissions levels they have, you know what type of person they might be, and what other kind of systems that they're using within the platform. It can be really handy. So imagine if your personas are a finance person, and you're building tools for finance, and you've got accountants, and your accountants are all people that use Excel every single day. You're like, okay, cool, I've got a persona of people that use Excel, so that means I can probably use my principles from my design principles from before and try to put something together that's intuitive by relying on the knowledge that my persona has, my finance people. So an interface for somebody that knows Excel is going to be completely different than an interface for somebody that doesn't. You can rely upon quick keys or grid layouts or whatever it may be. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that it helps get you some insight into how you can do your designs or how you can pick doing your designs. A couple of resources that we use for putting together our personas. Great one is UI Faces. You've probably seen this guy in a bunch of products. Flip through if you're flipping through new mobile apps, you'll actually see some of these faces on the apps. If you want to get your face on some apps, change your Twitter profile, take a nice picture, throw it on there, and if it's got cool gradients and stuff like this, I'm sure that a designer somewhere is going to steal it and stick it in a product. One of the things that we found was not to use people from our company as our personas, as our pictures for our personas, or as our names for our personas. And the reason for that is Hytham, for example, I know who Hytham is, I know how he acts, and imagine I stick him in the executive role, and he is now the CEO of the company. Hytham is a completely different person than our CEO. But if I put them in the profile and then I show one of the developers this thing, they're going to picture Hytham and be like, oh yeah, Hytham understands that this thing is easy to use because he's very technical. But our CEO might not be very technical. He's actually kind of technical, but don't use people from your company as your personas. It'll put people down the wrong path. Another one is we used to use Nick. Nick used to work here, and we used to use him in all of our stuff. He doesn't work here anymore. And now I see his face on every single thing that he's ever worked on, which is one of the most annoying things. So don't use people from your company in there. Another one is UI names. They recently did an update and added a globalization localization tool, so you can actually pick names from specific regions. It's another great way to pull names that are not necessarily like from your company. That's it for personas. Any questions on them? That one's important too for helping, again, these are all for helping build a culture of UX within your company. I think the last one that's left is critique, right?
I had a question on personas.
Okay.
So, again, just like a lot of other things, how do you keep them up to date? Like, Achievers, for example, is growing like crazy.
Yep.
Constantly evolving industry, evolving market. Do you tie metrics into that somehow? Like what?
Use them when you define a feature. Use them when you put together your requirements. Use them when you are doing a critique. Use them when you're doing a prototype. Always refer back to those things. Use them when you're doing your user stories. If you use them on a regular basis and you get into a situation, you're like, you know what? Like, we should probably update these because these are completely out of date because we now have this new user base. Use them in everything. Use them all the time. And I think that's the problem that we had before, was that we assumed that we had those three and we didn't have to think about it ever. And we knew that this feature was for that user, and we never had it as part of our conversations. But if you start to use these things, use your personas as part of your conversations, and refer back to them, then it'll be highlighted when they don't actually fit anymore. Cool. Critique. So we have a thing here. We have a thing here at Achievers where our development organization, our developers, our QA, and our product team and our designers all get in this room all at the same time. We have a retrospective. And basically what that is we call it brutal facts, and everybody's allowed to kind of rag on each other about how we did a good job or a bad job at the previous month. And it's just kind of like a review of how we work. One thing that comes up all the time is that designers don't share their stuff. So we like to take our stuff and work on things that are going to be cool in the future and hide them and wait for that like big like ta-da moment and be like, look at this thing I made. This is awesome. You guys should be like, check this out. I think that's because we're afraid of the feedback that we're going to get. So designers are creative people. They need to get into a flow. They need to get into a rhythm. And if you come in and you say, that's not going to work because of this other thing, they're like, oh, I love this thing. And I don't love it anymore. I'm going to work on something else. And they don't care. So instead of running into that situation, what you need to do is foster a place where it's actually safe to go and share and have a conversation. Designers critique stuff all the time. We're really good at critiquing, and you should be, or your designers should be really good at critiquing. Sometimes they do it wrong, but designers should be really good at critiquing. And it's really important to teach other people in the organization, other people that are, other stakeholders that are reviewing your stuff and trying to give you feedback, how to do critique. I've got a couple of things that I found that are super important for doing critique. Have your ducks in a row. Make sure that you're ready to present and ready to critique. So we work in an agile method. That means that at the end of a sprint, or developers should have their stuff on a server so that it can be reviewable, and the code should be clean, be working enough that we can actually click through it and check to see if something's working. From a design perspective, this means your stuff should be in a spot where it's shareable and you can show somebody how this thing actually is put together. So you have to be ready to be able to critique. Ask what you're critiquing, or know, or tell people what you're critiquing. This happens all the time. You can avoid the kind of CEO swoop and poop, or like, where they just kind of, yeah, the swoop and poop. That's when a CEO walks into the room and is like, I want to see what you guys are working on. And they look at the thing and they look at your building and they're like, is the building really going to be blue? Like, this is terrible. We need to do something about this. We need to, like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And you're like, no, we're not even there yet. Like, we're not even critiquing that yet. The building's not built yet. There's a whole bunch of siding that needs to go up on this thing. What we're talking about is whether this stake over here should be here or if it should be there. Where's the sidewalk going to be? Right? So make sure that you know what you're critiquing. So if you have stakeholders that come into a meeting, tell them this is where we are in the project. This is what we're looking at. We often have situations where people are saying, oh, I don't like how that word is written and that copy doesn't really make sense to me. It's like, yeah. A designer just chucked that in there, or a developer just put in, like, be with the force loop just because they were joking around in the interface. Yeah, so know what you're critiquing. Be very clear about where you're critiquing. Give context. Sometimes people don't, when they're giving feedback, they don't know what where this thing that they're giving feedback is in the grander scheme of things. So you might have a sign-up page for something, and you're like, here's the sign-up page. I want some feedback on this. And they start going through and looking at the design, whatever, where you're like, the reality is that this sign-up page comes from an email, or they need to have logged in already to get there to do this whole thing. Give people context as to how they got there and how the whole thing fits into the grander picture, and they'll be able to give you way better feedback. One of the tricks that I like to use is written flows. So sometimes you can't go and prototype the whole thing out, and you can't mock it all up, and you can't do all that. But you can write out on a piece of paper or on a notepad or however you want, these are the steps that it took for a user to get to this spot. So they received an email, they clicked on the email, they logged into the system, they clicked on this thing, and they got to this page. And now they're at this page. And everybody's like, okay, cool. So they've gone through all these steps, and they understand all this stuff, and now they're here. It's a really quick way to give people context on stuff. You can even do things like after they've clicked on this, they go and do this other stuff so that you don't have to have everything built to be able to talk about it. Don't be a jerk. Nobody likes unsolicited feedback. I'm not going to walk up to Martin and be like, hey, Martin, I don't like your shirt. It's ugly. I just don't like it. If my wife asks me if I like her shirt, I'm not even going to tell her if I like her shirt or not. But don't be a jerk. Just be polite about stuff. And don't give feedback when it's not wanted. Somebody might be in the middle of working on something. A dev might be working on a project and not be ready to have you come and look over their shoulder and be like, I want to see how that interaction works. And they're like, I'm in the middle of coding this other thing and it's totally broken. It's not the right time. Give them the opportunity to back out so that you can give feedback when it's appropriate. Same thing happens with designers as well. This one's super important. Ask why. Why laddering is, does everybody know what why laddering is? Nobody knows. Okay, cool. So little kids do this all the time. Right? They get to that stage in life and they're like, what's that thing? And it's like, or it's that. And it's like, well, why is that like that? It's like, because it's like, why? Because blah, blah, blah. Well, why? Because, well, why? Like, they just keep going over and over and over again because they're trying to get deeper and deeper and deeper into the reasons behind stuff. And you can do this too. You can do the exact same thing. You don't always have to ask, like, why every single time. But somebody might give you a piece of feedback in a critique after you looked at something, and they may say, well, I think that thing is confusing. And you're like, okay, well, why is it confusing? As well, I've got to click twice on this thing. Okay, well, why is that confusing to you? Well, it says here that I only have to click once. It's like, okay, so your problem isn't that that thing is actually confusing, that you have to click twice. Your problem is that the copy on that other thing is actually wrong. All right, so that's a really crappy example, but if you use why laddering, you can get to the root cause of what the actual problem is. And you can use these in your user tests as well. So as you're going through a user test and somebody gets stuck on something, and they ask them to explain why they're stuck, and keep digging, keep digging, and keep digging until you get to the real root cause of the problem. Try to catch yourself not doing this. You'll be surprised how many times you actually don't do this. Somebody will tell you something, and they'll tell you that something is wrong, and you'll be like, okay, cool, I'll go fix it. And then you leave. And you haven't continued to delve and ask why. Try to catch yourself doing that. The other thing that I didn't put in here is use your principles in a critique. So, did I put that in here? No, I didn't. So, use your principles in a critique. It's a great way to not be a jerk. So, you're critiquing stuff and you're talking about the product. Everybody that's working on something is doing it to their best of their ability. Everybody's a professional. And the feedback that somebody's giving in a critique is not, it's not about you. It's not about something that you've done that's necessarily wrong. I'm just trying to tell you that I don't think that this thing is clean, which is something that we've already agreed upon is important. I don't think that this thing is vibrant, which we've already agreed upon that's important. I don't think that this thing, that it hasn't taken into account that it's not using smart copy or something like that. Use your principles to shift the conversation from being about somebody's feelings or whatever and over to being about the product itself. I think that's all of them. Does anybody have any questions on critiquing?
How do you deal with opinions that may cross a bit subjective? So if someone tells you, I don't like it, but not because it's confusing, I just don't like the color red.
Bring it back to your principles. So, like, if you say, so why don't you like why don't you like the color red? Is the color red because is it conflicting with? Is it too vibrant for this thing, or are we using color in the wrong way? Like, is this page not supposed to be vibrant for whatever reason? Is it making it not be clean? Is it screwing up the hierarchy on something? You're not focusing on hierarchy anymore. You can relate all that stuff back to the principles. There's always going to be a reason why that thing is bugging them. And if you keep asking, it might just be because their like ex-wife or girlfriend or whatever always wore a red dress, so they just don't like red or something like that, right? That's kind of I've had that exact debate around blue. This is the wrong blue. I don't like this blue. It needs to be or whatever. And you end up having to have a real principled discussion around a proper blue. Which is kind of weird, but welcome to design. Does anybody have any other questions?
I'm sorry to ask so many questions. So, on that same note, do you ever find yourself in a situation where something is, it's like you get subjective kind of critiquing or feedback, you can't really relate the reason for the decision back to a design principle, but the real answer is that neither of you really know what's going to work better, and the only way is to put it out there and test it or see metrics or something like that, or falling back on you're the authority on making that decision. Do you ever kind of run yourself in that situation, or can you always relate it back to design principles or some sort of reason?
So one of the things I didn't put in here around critiques, so if a designer is running critique, the designer should be the design owner, right? It's not the developer's job to go and do design. If the design fails or gets screwed up or whatever, it's because the designer screwed up, not because the developer screwed up. If the code that shipped is buggy, it's because the developer screwed up, not because of the designer. So there's always that kind of pivot that you can say, well, it's my job to figure this out. I'm the professional. Let me go and do some tests or whatever and see if it's actually affecting things in the way that you expect. That's one thing. The other one, again, is de-risk. Figure out if that's something that's actually going to hinder your users from enjoying the feature. Is it stopping the core reason why you're building the thing? And figure out how to test it. Just throw it in front of somebody and see if they're running into those same issues. Yeah.
I don't agree with the statement you just made about the ownership belongs to the designer.
Okay.
Because a certain design will have some implication on the development.
Yep.
Which can cause bugs.
Yeah.
So the ownership could be more of a collaboration.
The conversation and the culture should breed that collaboration, right? So they should be working hand in hand to make those things happen. And those decisions that the design decisions that happen need to happen together. The more that you can get designers and developers to work together and to have those conversations, the more that you'll avoid those situations right from the very start. Because you won't get into a spot where a designer's gone and put something together and it's got some crazy animations, stuff flying all over the place, and be like, we want to do this. And the developer's like, I'm not going to do that. It's going to be crazy buggy. The problem there isn't that there's a design owner. The problem is that you didn't have the conversation early enough around what you were going to do and work together as a team. And if the developer understands that there's a culture of UX, then they're part of that. Everybody's part of that culture. It takes a developer to properly execute on something for that experience to be good, right? So everybody has to kind of work together to make the whole thing happen.
A question about metrics. So let's say that, is there a possibility that you can look at too many metrics that are often irrelevant? What should you really focus
Yeah, you can definitely be overwhelmed by metrics. I've spent days going down rabbit holes trying to figure out something that had no use whatsoever just because I was like, this is a cool insight into I don't know what. Metrics can be fun that way, that's true. The thing is, though, with metrics, if you use them to support an argument or you use them to make a decision, you're usually trying to, you have a direction that you want to follow, and then you can use your metrics to validate whether that direction is right or not. That's a good way of doing it, or using to measure whether you were successful in the choices that you made. But usually you wouldn't just look at all of your metrics and then try to come out with a hypothesis around what to do next. That's really, really hard. That's a very difficult thing to do. At Achievers, we have a data analyst, and she's got a team that she works with, and part of her job is to figure out like how things are organized and how things are structured and put those together in visual forms to be able to give back to the rest of the company so that to put that information in front of people to try to spark some of those ideas around, hey, where can we go next based on the fact that people do this when they're in the platform or people do this within the platform. And that kind of thing can help breed innovation. It's really easy, yeah, if you're just you sitting down with your metrics, once you've got them going, it's really easy to go down rabbit holes. Make sure that you're using them for something useful.
I have a question about personas. How do you deal with overlapping personas? And so you mentioned an example about a manager being able to recognize their direct reports so that they can feel appreciated. But what if the functionality of recognizing other users is something that's not only done by managers but several other personalities and personas? How do you deal with that overlap, and how do you deal with it, especially when it comes to writing effective stories where you're actually defining a role?
So I've written stories where, as a manager, admin, blah, 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 as all of those different roles, I want to be able to do something. And that helps encompass all of those things together.
So your design team is also working on sprints along with developers?
Yeah.
And so when you do your testing, your prototyping, how many sprints ahead of like actually going and building?
So yeah, one of the things about doing design within Agile, it's really, really difficult. It's really, really hard, and a lot of these failures are bred out of that. Right now, we've shifted to kind of include a discovery sprint or like a sprint zero at the very beginning to do a little like to figure out if we need to do designs and that kind of stuff. The other thing that you can do is spike your sprints. So you can do a research spike and say, we need to stop here. We're going to carve off a couple of developers. We're going to carve off a couple of designers. And we're going to just go and run and de-risk this thing and test and prototype because we're not 100% sure that this thing is actually going to work. And then come back, and then once that work is done, come back and continue. We've got 2 projects right now that are doing that within our release right now.
How do you get buy-in for that, like from the stakeholders? Like for prototyping, how did you do things?
User tests. So you videotape a couple of user tests showing that, like, here is the value of doing a prototype. Having a log of, like, these are how many that we have done and the ones that we haven't done. Which features are actually performing well based on our metrics, right? Like, here's our metrics showing that these ones are working, these ones are not working. These are the ones that we tested, these are the ones that we didn't test. That whole, when you start piecing all these things together, it becomes very obvious that you've got a story that you can go and tell to an executive. Does that answer? Yeah. One more question?
This is something that you probably know because you're a designer. So suppose you look at the metrics, right? It shows you the flow and what is not working.
Yeah.
What are some things that you look for so that you can change your design in a different way? Like, what are some things that stand out?
I think the first question I always ask is why. So if I think about a feature that we put together, we made an assumption at the very beginning that it should work in a certain way, right? And then our adoption levels aren't high, and people aren't using it in the same kind of thing, and it's not working that way. You can always go back to some of the original designs that we put together that we threw out. You're like, why did we throw out those ones? Would they have worked better? Go back and actually run another user test on our live live thing and figure out if it's working or not. I think that's part of the like creative inspiration and trying to figure out how to solve a problem. It's part of like the design challenge, and it's part of what makes design interesting and makes design fun. But using a lot of the tools, looking at the metrics, bringing up the stuff from before, having conversations with people, those are probably the most powerful ways of actually going back and discovering why something needs to change, or in what direction you need to change it.
So I guess what I meant to say was, suppose you use a tool set that someone's clicking on the button.
Yeah.
What should you do? Should you make the button bigger or change the layout? Or not have the button? Like, how do you make this?
I can't tell you. I can't tell you for a specific thing. So imagine you have a sign-up page and there's a button here and nobody's clicking on your sign-up button. Make like 10 different versions. A/B test them. Throw them out there and see which one people actually respond to the most. Figure out a way that you can prototype that, and figure out a way that you can iterate and test. For that specific thing, you might want to look at like lean development or like something around that, where you go and you figure out a small little chunk that you want to test, and you go out there, and when that's working, then you can move to the next piece, and then move to the next piece. Iteration and testing.
The reason I'm bringing this up is because the company I work with, we're trying to add all of this metrics right now, but you already know there's some designs that actually do work. So I can just go and use those stuff, right?
What's that? Yeah. Let's talk afterwards. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you, Bobby.
Can I go back to yours?
That was an awesome talk. So I'm not going to show you more fail pictures, just a few quick house cleaning items. House cleaning or housekeeping? Which one is it? Whatever one. All right, awesome. All right, so again, just a reminder, we're hiring. So achievers.com/careers. If you are interested or know anyone who is interested, please do have them visit the site. We usually update our careers page with the new job posts, and there are some right now. We're looking for developers, so please have a look online and let all your friends know. Are there any general announcements? No? Anyone hosting any events? Michelle?
So if you're not following our Twitter, I actually upload a picture of our pattern library. So if you want to see it, it's up there.
Awesome. Any more general announcements? Yes.
Just a quick announcement, if anybody's into hacking health, there is a hackathon in Hamilton coming up shortly. So look up hackinghealth.ca. We're looking for designers, business people, doctors, neuroscientists, and we mash them all together and create some really cool stuff. Thanks.
Cool, awesome. Any more general announcements? Okay, all right. And as always, please do reach out to us. Feel free to reach us on Twitter, Facebook, email. Join the MeetUp group if you haven't already, and do let your friends know. Again, so that we can all enjoy these events. We do host them usually about monthly or so. If you have any questions for Bobby and you didn't get a chance to, please try to catch him offline. Mingle around, stick around. Have a great evening. And if you don't get a chance to ask your questions, feel free to ask them later on and reach us through any of these forums, and we'll be happy to redirect your questions to Bobby. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming out once again, and have a safe ride home.